Even besides something like that, and the fumes and the smell and the worry, just not knowing where it's emanating from or
I know
what's behind it all.
Horrible.
If you've got a story to tell, tweet us at GB News. Children aged between 5 and 11 are to be offered a COVID vaccine in England and Northern Ireland. Health experts say it may reduce risks children could face in a possible future wave or another COVID variant.
Well, the programme's going to be rolled out in April, and for reaction to this, Dr. Mo Kaki joins us now. Good morning. Is this the right decision? Why are we doing it?
I think it is. I think it's a good proactive step, really, because we know that this current variant, the Omicron variant, has been kind to us in some ways, but we don't know what the future holds. And so this is really about future-proofing children and giving parents the option to have that future-proofing.
Yeah. Does that mean then that they just have the 3 injections that most people have had now? Or are they going to have even more than that for the rest of their lives?
At the moment, the Joint Commission on Vaccination and Immunisation have said is that this will be a one-off. And it will be 2 vaccinations, and it will be a third of the dose of an adult. So 2 vaccinations, one 12-week apart, and then we'll see how things go, really. The key point is to try to bolster the immunity of children. The great thing about the pandemic has been that if you can find a silver lining, has been that children haven't been so badly affected. So this is really about protecting their future.
So talking about the future, I mean, there'll be future variants, of course, as well.
Yeah.
So what are we actually protecting them against? Can you actually say, well, you're protecting them against COVID-19, you're protecting them against Omicron, or you're protecting them against all of those?
Well, all of those are current variants. The key question is, are future variants going to be more dangerous? And the data has shown that if 1 million children are vaccinated and there's a variant that's more dangerous, like the ones we've seen in the past, you're looking at potentially 98 reductions in hospitalizations, which is a fair amount of children, really. Of course, if it's something like the Omicron variant, which hasn't been so dangerous, we're looking at reducing the hospitalizations of children to 17. So not huge numbers, but again, we just don't know what the future holds. And I think that's been the story of the pandemic, and that's why this has been issued at this time.
And equally, schools have been a breeding ground for this, haven't they? The children themselves may not necessarily have been ill with it, but they have been taking the virus home and passing it on, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the key elements of it. We know that the fact that children are together, they are seeing themselves, and we know that childcare has been such a challenge during this whole pandemic, that schools being open is so important, that actually, if we can reduce that transmission, if we have that ability to support children, it's brilliant, and families, and reduce the vaccination requirement, etc.
Doctor, the word vaccination is very emotive with so many people, particularly when it comes to children. And, I remember when my children were young, there was the whole MMR controversy in the 90s, and parents were frightened. They're absolutely frightened about this.
Yeah.
What would you say to reassure anyone watching today, or anybody who's just so anti this? Are we getting data yet which is saying these are or are not the side effects of vaccines? Or is it building enough that we can actually, with authority, say they do work, they do not cause this, they do cause that?
Yes, I mean, we have now vaccinated millions and millions of people, and all of that research has demonstrated that there aren't that many long-term side effects that we've found. There are very few, in fact, that anyone has been able to determine. I think, particularly in this case with children, what's been really reassuring is that 8 million children in the US have already had this vaccination. And if you're a parent of someone who's had a vulnerable condition, a child who's ill, you'll have already had this vaccination for the children. So actually, we're now looking at children who are not vulnerable, who are not potentially ill, but actually looking at protecting them in the future. And there's so much evidence to demonstrate that this has been protective. I think it's only positive news, really.
So the question I suppose we're going to say to you at home today is, should we be offering vaccines to children? And of course, I think it's not even so much the COVID contamination, it's the effects of long COVID as well, and this would be protecting against that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the key elements of the vaccination. I think the real dilemma here in the whole pandemic has been, regarding vaccination, has been, well, who's going to get long COVID and who's not?
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that you we can't understand. There's no determinant. You could be completely healthy, 20-year-old male and have no issues and get long COVID, or you could just get a slight sniffle and have COVID.
And long COVID is a serious condition in itself now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you guys said earlier in the programme, 60% of people who have COVID have developed depression, have developed anxiety. It's really affected our mental health. So that, in combined with long COVID, which is debilitating and really affects us.
It's all very complex. And on that subject, let's join Sammie Mcfarland now. Sammie is the CEO and founder of the charity Long COVID Kids. So basically, Sammie, tell us, I mean, you heard us touching upon the whole subject of long COVID there. Why and how should we be worried about this?
So we've been raising awareness of long COVID in children since October 2020. My daughter developed long COVID in March 2020. We had, both of us had mild COVID infection. We recovered initially and then 5 to 6 weeks later developed long COVID. At the time, long COVID didn't even have a name and there was nowhere to turn to, no information. And I was told that if my daughter tried harder and spent more time with her friends, she would get better, that she was mimicking my symptoms. And 2 years on, we now have the ONS stating that there's 117,000 children living with long COVID. And we know that many of the children from the first wave are still not recovered. These are life-changing, chronic and disabling symptoms for many children that impact their everyday life.
That's probably a story that not too many people are aware of, unless as a family you are actually involved in a situation like that. So what sort of reaction are you getting, not just from families, but from the children when you suggest that they have one of these jabs?
So the vaccine wasn't available for my child, and I now have a child that had underlying conditions who is now living a very limited life. She describes her life as a half-life. And families in our group are extremely pleased to be able to have the choice of the vaccine. And I think that's really what this is about. It's about there hasn't been choice to protect children, and now there is a choice, and we welcome that.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Mo, thank you also very much. Can I just say that Eamonn is very envious of your hair.
Yes. Very what?
Envious of his hair.
This is
Very envious. I mean, that's unnaturally thick hair.
Yes, yeah.